This episode of Going Hollywood is dedicated to the memory of Mrs. Rose Sarp. Your air laugh will live forever.
Now, when I'm very good and do as I am told, I'm Mama's little angel, and Papa says I'm good as gold. But when I'm very bad and answer back and sass, then I'm Mama's little devil, and Papa says I've got the brass. Now, I wish that you would tell me, 'cause I'm much too young to know. Guess who I am?
Can you give me a hint?
I'm Baby Jane Hudson.
The hell was Baby Jane Hudson?
My sister doesn't ever go out. She's not fit to receive visitors.
I was watching you.
Then you're an idiot.
You wouldn't be able to do these awful things to me if I weren't still in this chair.
But you are, Blanche. You are in that chair.
She's sick and she's not getting any better.
You miserable. I've written a letter to Daddy. Oh, Blanche, you know we got rats in the cellar?
Hello, I'm film historian Tony Maeda.
And I'm Brad Shreve, who's just a guy who likes movies.
We discuss movies and television from Hollywood's golden age. We go behind the scenes and share our opinions, too.
And of course, being the average guy, my opinions are the ones that matter.
As does your self-delusion. Welcome to Going Hollywood.
All this time we could have been friends.
Tony, you know very well about the stories behind the big feud between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford.
Yes, I've heard one or two, yeah.
Yeah, a few things have come out about that.
Just a couple.
I don't think we should harp on that too much because so much has been said about it, and it's hard to determine what is true and what is not. But I do think we need to at least touch on it. And we would be remiss not to discuss it in some manner. And so I'm going to play a little something for you.
Okay. Oh, fun.
This is Bette Davis in 19...
Singing Whatever Happened to Baby Jane? Whatever happened to Baby Jane? Sorry, I had to get it in.
No, I cannot put up with that little girl singing that song. I can't imagine.
It's not her. It's her on Betty on the Andy Williams show singing Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. You ever saw that?
Oh, I didn't know that. No.
Oh, well, I just sang it for you, so.
This is from 1987, an interview with Bryant Gumbel on the Today Show.
Oh, good.
And Bryant asked her about the story between her and Joan Crawford and whatever happened to Baby Jane.
Okay.
And here's what Betty had to say.
I know, isn't it incredible we're forever linked? We made one film. It's funny that remains.
I'm sorry.
Well, it was a good movie. It was a good movie. As far as making the film with her, she was on time. She knew her lines. She basically was a pro.
Oh, really?
But we're very different kind of women, very different kind of actresses. Yes.
How would you characterize
the
your
way it
relationship?
came when she saw to it I didn't get the Oscar for Baby Jane. She went to all the New York nominees and said, if you can't get out there, I'll accept your award. And please do not vote for her. She was so jealous. She was a fool, my dear. We had a great percentage. If I had won that Oscar, we'd have made $1 million more on the film. That's what always happens. So she wasn't very smart about what she did.
You hurt by the memory of that?
I was furious because that would have made me the first person with 3. And as I always have to be first as an Aries. Yes, and I should have had it all. Very immodest of me. I should have had it for that year, no question.
So much to unpack in that clip.
I love the first thing she said is she knew her lines and she was on time.
How's that for a compliment? She was on time and she knew her lines. Well, I love so many things about that clip. First of all, I love that that's post-stroke Betty. So she's really unfiltered and everything is like this. But here's what so many things I love about that clip. Yes, that backhanded, she was on time, she knew her lines. But Betty said that, Betty held that they were nothing alike. And okay, we just talk for a minute here about that? Okay. Betty always said that Joan was the movie star and Betty was the actress. Okay, but what was Bette Davis but an actress? And Joan Crawford gave some incredible performances on film. They were both strong women who fought for their stardom. They were both Aries. They both had ungrateful children who wrote tell-all books about them. They were both married 4 times, and they both were demanding, driving perfectionists who were utter professionals for most of their career. So I don't know if that's nothing in common. That sounds like a hell of a lot in common to me, Betty, but I understand what you're saying.
Yes, indeed. Though Joan's daughter waited until she died before she wrote her book, did she not?
She did, but that's just because Betty's daughter, thought Betty was going to die.
And she didn't.
Betty had a series of strokes, and she didn't. That's the thing. And Betty said that. She wrote the book because she thought Betty was going to die because she had a series of strokes. She had cancer, which eventually killed her. But, Bette Davis, there was no keeping Bette Davis down, obviously. She did not die, and that book came out, and boy, can you imagine what a gut punch from your only biological child. Betty had 3 children, 2 were adopted, but BD was hers. She gave birth to her, and she was her pride and joy too. So, in Bette Davis's credit, she carried on for a couple more years and did interviews like that you just played, which I loved. I loved that.
And there's a big difference between Betty and her daughter. I mean, I remember an interview, it may even been the same one, where Betty said, I don't believe women should wait to have sex before they get married because they get married and I don't remember her exact words, but what if it's not any good?
No, yeah. Well, she said her mother made a huge mistake with that when she didn't allow her to
And then you turn around and her daughter is now a minister.
B.D. Hyman.
She's had a ministry for years.
B.D. Hyman turned into a horror story. Much scarier than anything in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Much scarier. But by the way, that is one of the scary things about Whatever Happened to Baby Jane is it features B.D. Merrill, at that time, Bette Davis's daughter. And she, remember how we talked about Truman Capote and I said last week, and I said that he was on the cusp of just so bad he's good. He didn't quite make it. Same thing with B.D. She just is bad in this movie. But it's one of the treats of watching this movie. So I think we should say we're talking about Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Did we say that yet, Brad?
I don't know, but yes, we are talking about Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. If you haven't figured it out by now,
I would think they
would.
It's
the only movie they did together.
It's the only movie they did, and they're forever linked. We did one movie, and we're forever linked because of that movie, but because of a lot of other reasons. Before we start, I do want to set a couple parameters here, because otherwise, this podcast has the potential for being as long as the movie itself, which is way too long. I don't want us to discuss the Ryan Murphy show Feud. I don't. We can maybe talk about that some other time. Maybe next year we can talk about Feud. I have a lot of thoughts about Feud, but you know what? I don't want you, but you can go online and watch a lot of great videos, and there's just great resources out there to talk about what Feud got right and what Feud got wrong. In my opinion, pretty much everything is wrong in Feud, except for the fact that B.D. Hyman was indeed Bette Davis's daughter. But I liked some things about Feud, some things I didn't. But I don't want to talk about Feud. Right?
I agree with you, and here's my reason why. We've talked about Ryan Murphy before. I can't remember the name of the movie. It's the one where Darren Criss starred as the serial killer that killed Versace.
It's the American Horror Story. It's
Versace.
Versace.
The Versace.
Yeah.
Now, Darren Criss, when it first came on, I feel like, oh my God, I'm watching Blaine from Glee. I'm never going to be able to separate him. This is not going to be good. And then he quickly changed me. He was fucking scary.
Brilliant.
I was really impressed by that. But Ryan took a lot of liberties in that movie.
Well, he always does.
And
that's Ryan Murphy.
He does. And so that's why I'm not, like the Feud, I have no desire to see the Feud. Because how do I take, I'd have to research to find what was true and what was Ryan Murphy.
Or you can just ask me.
So,
just ask me. I'll tell you. Because I'm sitting there with my notebook going, that's not right. That's not right. That's not right. You know, the last two episodes, this is the last thing I'm going to say about Feud. I love the performances. Jessica Lange is wonderful. I don't know who she's doing. She's not doing Joan Crawford. She's doing a movie star like Joan Crawford, and she's brilliant. Susan Sarandon, not so much. She could have had a little more fire in her. But the last two episodes are wonderful because it deals with them aging and what they dealt with. But the Baby Jane stuff, the Baby Jane episodes, yes, much more fiction than fact in any of that.
Good. Then I will continue staying away from. They're great. They're certainly entertaining, but I'm going to say it, lies mixed in with truth. And then I don't mind a movie that they do this all the time. They take two real people and combine them into one character. I get it.
Yeah.
You got a 2-hour movie, you have to do that. I don't have issues with that. But when they change the entire storyline, that's an issue for me.
No. Well, we talked about it before. It's dramatic license versus dramatic licentiousness.
Yes. Perfect description.
I can't tolerate it at all. But this, whatever happened to Baby Jane, talking about the differences between these women and their alleged feud, I think is really fascinating because I just listed the ways these women were similar. And wouldn't it have been wonderful if they could have just been able to commiserate with each other for those similarities, for their ungrateful children, for their unsuccessful marriages, for being two powerhouse women in Hollywood dealing with what Hollywood does to older actresses. And, it kind of summed up so beautifully in Baby Jane, all that time they could have been friends. So it's really, but they couldn't. They couldn't get past it. But that's also what makes Baby Jane, whatever happened to Baby Jane, so delicious, is the knowledge that these two women did not like each other, but worked together and made this incredible film.
And what the funny part about that is, and I'm not even going to try and paraphrase, so I'll just say, her intent to say Bette Davis was her concern about women is they tend to be catty against each other when strong women should be supporting each other to help lift each other up. And then here she has that feud with Joan.
That's just Bette Davis. I mean, Bette Davis, yes. That's just who Bette Davis was. Bette Davis was number one. She said it to Brian Gumbel. I have to be number one. And she was absolutely right. Baby Jane was her 10th Oscar nomination. And she would have been the first actress to win 3. But in saying she deserved it, okay, well, she always thought she deserved it. We've said that before. But she kind of negates an incredible performance. And this whole Oscar thing between them negates an incredible performance done by one Anne Bancroft in The Miracle Worker. So, yes, Betty, you did an amazing job as Jane Hudson. We're going to talk about that. But you can't negate that Anne Bancroft, in most people's opinion, and in fact, in the Academy voters' opinions, gave the best performance that year. Now, that's arguable. I happen to prefer Katharine Hepburn in Long Day's Journey into Night, but we'll talk about that some other time.
Yeah, I was really wowed by Betty, and I could see why she was nominated. I have seen The Miracle Worker many times, but I can't remember it enough to say she should have won the award. So
we should do it sometime. We'll watch it. We'll save that one for next year, too. We got 2 for next season already on the docket. But whatever happened to Baby Jane? We're talking about today, one of our Halloween episodes from Warner Brothers in 1962. And I wanted to ask you, what is your first memory of seeing this film?
Well, I got to say something. I was absolutely shocked at something when I watched this. Before the other night, If you asked me if I had seen this film, I would have bet you $1 million I had watched this film. It started, and like, gee, I don't remember this whole vaudeville stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I realize it's because I've seen so much of it and heard so much of it. I just always assumed I'd watched it.
Really?
I had never seen this film. I hate, a lot of people don't hate the cliche, but take away my gay card because I have never seen this film. But the reason why is I was absolutely certain I'd seen it. And it wasn't like Gone with the Wind, which I have never seen in one sitting. I'm certain, all of Gone with the Wind if I piece it all together.
Right.
I don't think that, I probably thought that was true with this film, but no, not even close.
Wow.
Not even close.
So this was actually your virgin viewing of whatever happened to Baby Jane?
Yes.
Oh my
And it
God.
absolutely sucked. I'm joking. I'm joking.
I'm like, podcast over. Thank you for listening, everybody. That was our shortest episode ever. Well, here, Baby Jane for me, kind of like Bewitched was in the fabric of my childhood, and Baby Jane has been in the fabric of my childhood as a gay man, yes, but it was more than that. Baby Jane was a big movie when I was in college. We would watch Baby Jane and laugh and laugh and laugh. Now, I did go to a performing arts college, so maybe that's something to do with it. But to me, it's kind of like the Chinatown of Grand Dame Guignol. It's truly the mountaintop. Baby Jane, it's epic performances, legendary stories. You have what Andrew Sarris called the screen's ultimate masochist, Joan Crawford, meeting the screen's ultimate sadist, Bette Davis, in this clash of the titans. So you can also call this Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, i.e., Clash of the Hollywood Titans, because it is, and there are no survivors when this film is over. Should we talk a little bit about the history and how Baby Jane came about, and before we get into the story, or would you rather talk about the plot first?
Let me do the plot first.
Okay.
For those individuals like me who thought they saw it and will find their surprise they did not.
And they didn't.
This is a 1962 psychological horror, thriller, drama, suspense. It's all the above. This was 62 years ago, which is hard to imagine.
God.
It's based on the 1960 novel of the same name, and he was one of the co-writers of the film as well.
Mm-hmm.
It was produced and directed by Robert Aldrich. Now, Aldrich is known for doing a lot of... They look to me like B-movie horror films because most of them I never heard of, but I could be wrong. I'm just making that assumption.
Well, he was a big macho. He was a macho director. Aldrich.
Yes. And
he directed The Dirty Dozen. He directed Kiss Me Deadly. I mean, so the fact that he had this side gig of doing these, these hagsploitation, which is an unflattering name they gave to these types of films, as a sideline is kind of really interesting.
He did Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte with Betty, but then he also did, The Dirty Dozen, you said, he did The Longest Yard. He did The Choir Boys. Talk about testosterone films.
Well, but think about it for a minute. It ain't that much different to deal with Lee Marvin and Ernest Borgnine than it is to deal with Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. I mean, you're going into a real battle regardless.
That is true. So in addition to them, it stars King Tut himself, Victor Buono.
Film debut.
Yes. Marjorie Bennett, Mady Norman, and Anna Lee. And some additional cast members as well. And the way the story begins, it begins in vaudeville of 1917. And Bette Davis, her younger self, is Baby Jane Hudson. And she is a song and dance star on the vaudeville circuit. I can't for the life of me figure out how, because she's so... By the time it was so sugary sweet, everybody in the theater, their teeth must have fallen out of their mouth. She also happens to be a spoiled, nasty, rotten brat whose father coddles her mainly for the money. And her sister Blanche, the younger Joan Crawford, is kind of to the wayside. Yes. Now, what is Blanche's downfall is her mother makes her promise that when she finally gets big someday, she will never treat her sister the way her sister treated her.
I won't forget. You bet I won't forget. Oh. And she does not. That little girl's fantastic. She looks like a mini Joan Crawford. She really does.
Yes.
Yeah.
She actually reminded me of a brunette, the Bad Seed girl.
Oh yeah, very Rhoda.
The look on her face watching her sister on stage.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So we move forward 20 years. It's 1930s, and now Blanche is a big movie star. And because of her promise to her mother, she helps Jane in Hollywood. She has enough clout. And Jane is pretty much starring in B movies, and she's not good at all. The one film they show, they're scrapping the film because it was so bad.
And they show actual Bette Davis, Joan Crawford films.
I figured those were old.
Yes.
I figured they were clips that probably would hit the floor.
Well, they were two of Bette Davis's most disliked films, Ex-Lady and Parachute Jumper, which she detested. So she's like, show those. And they were one of Joan Crawford's biggest hits, Sadie McKee, which Joan loved. So they showed
Very
that.
nice.
Anyway, I interrupted you.
So
go ahead.
So Blanche and Jane are driving home, and there is a car accident, and Blanche ends up in a wheelchair. And because of her wheelchair, she is confined to her home. For some reason, in a wheelchair, they didn't give her a bedroom downstairs. So she's actually literally confined to her bedroom.
Yes.
And Jane has to take care of her. She's controlling. Her resentment grows as the story grows. And that controlling turns into torture, plain and simple torture.
Plain and simple torture.
So it's a difficult film.
It is. It's disturbing.
So, and that's basically the story. And then we learn more about the relationship and maybe what really goes on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is. No, it's disturbing. It's such, it's like I said, the Chinatown of camp now that it's hard to remember. This was intended as a shocker. I mean, this was not long after Psycho. So, and that's part of the genesis of this whole thing. Joan Crawford, for everything we know about Joan Crawford could read movie trends. Joan Crawford, there's a reason why she kept her career going from the silent films all the way up into the 70s, because she knew what audiences wanted. She was very attuned to it. She would shift her image. She would change her screen persona to fit the times. And she was looking for a film. She'd been looking for a film to do with Bette Davis, which is kind of interesting, since the 40s. She wanted to do a version of Ethan Frome with Bette in the 40s when they were both at Warner Brothers, but it never happened because she wanted Bette to play the unattractive one, of course. But anyway, I'm off point here. So Joan had worked with Robert Aldrich in Autumn Leaves in 1955, and she kept saying she wanted to work together. She wanted to work with him again, but she wanted to do a project with Bette. And that's when the novel Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, written by Henry Farrell, was published in 1960. Now, there's a couple stories about how it came to Joan's attention. Some people say Joan did it. Some people said that Aldrich saw it. The version that I think is most verifiable is that it came to Aldrich's attention. His secretary sent it to him. And he thought, here's the film for Joan Crawford and Bette Davis. So he contacted Joan. They had lunch. She agreed, and it is true, and this is the legend, that Joan went to see Bette. Bette was on Broadway, very unhappily, performing in The Night of the Iguana, and she did come to the theater and meet with Bette and say, I have a project for us. Left the book with Bette. Bette looked at it, and Bette apparently called Aldrich and said, I have two questions for you. First of all, what part do I play? He said, Baby Jane. And she said, of course, that's good. Second question, did you ever fuck Joan Crawford? Now, the reason she asked this was not because she gave a shit about Joan Crawford's personal sex life, but because she knew Joan had a tendency to sleep with her directors and thereby get them on her side, which, so did Bette, P.S. So, I mean, this is just the way the machinations of this happen. So Bette agreed to do it, and that's how it happened. But they couldn't get financing for it. Aldrich took this to studio after studio after studio. And very famously, he heard from one executive, those two old broads, I wouldn't give you a dime.
Wow.
They finally, have you heard these stories about how difficult it was to get financing for the film, Brad?
No, it doesn't surprise me because it's a really difficult film.
It's
I
disturbing.
can see why having these, what I presume, you can tell me if there's other reasons, but to have these women that were two huge stars as they're getting older to put them in this horror film.
Well, yeah, that was it. It wasn't the subject matter because Psycho was a huge hit.
Yes.
So this was definitely, as I said before, this was definitely the potential was huge here. It was the fact that they were these two old broads. In fact, one producer said to Aldrich, I'll give you the money for this if you cast two younger actresses. So, I mean, this is a real thing. And just to put this into perspective here, I just want to put this into perspective. In 1962, Bette Davis was 54 years old. All right, just stop for a minute there. Okay, 54. Joan was either 55 or 62. We're not really sure.
I saw 57, so who the hell knows?
Well, Joan Crawford's birth date changed back and forth. Bette Davis swore she was born in 1900 if she was born today, but I don't think she was quite that much older. So yes, Joan was but they were in their mid-50s. That's the best way to say it. So when you think about that, when Jessica Lange and Susan Sarandon played them in Feud, they're in their 70s, okay? These women were in their mid-50s and they were being referred to as old broads. So just think about that for a minute. But they finally got financing from an independent company called Seven Arts, but it was minuscule. I mean, we're talking like the lowest of low budgets. $800,000, I believe, was somewhere around $800,000 was the budget for this. So this was going to be a very quick shoot. And they negotiated their salaries, and I love this. This is what I really love about Joan Crawford. And I said she was a very astute businesswoman. You know, Pepsi-Cola, you know, that's not a myth. She was the face of Pepsi for years after Albert Steele died too.
And my understanding is that she insisted Pepsi machines be put on the studio.
Oh yeah,
I don't know if
there's
that's
all
true,
those,
but...
yeah. And Bob Aldrich liked Coke, and there was all those battles about that. Yeah, but so Betty didn't really think this movie had a lot of potential. So she insisted on $60,000 plus 10% of the net profits over $850,000, which was the budget. Joan said, that's okay. Go ahead, Betty, dear Betty. That's all right, dear Betty. I'll take $30,000 and 15% of the net profits over $840,000. Well, Baby Jane grossed almost $10 million. So who do you think came out with a bigger paycheck here? Joan Crawford made over $1 million. And, you know, there was a lot of publicity about Elizabeth Taylor being the first actress to get $1 million for one role in 1963 for Cleopatra, but it was Joan Crawford. It was Joan Crawford. I love that.
Year before.
I love that Joan was that smart and that farsighted, and it just shows you what an incredibly astute businesswoman she was. But this was still a cheapie. It was made in 34 days. So there was no time for feuding. There was no time for arguing. And that's what these women always said. There was no time because we had to show up, know our lines, be on time, and make this thing work. And they did. At such a low budget, they had no choice.
Tony, you and I get excited when we get messages and emails and texts from listeners that tell us how much they enjoy the show.
We do.
But, you know, I think we should push it a little bit and ask them to go a little bit further.
Ooh, challenge.
If you enjoy this show, let others know. 5 stars are great, whatever you want to give, except 1 star. If you have 1 star, say, you know, that show's not for me and move on.
Yeah, you don't give us 1 star. Just say, no, not for me. Just skip it. Or tell your friends. That's the best way too, right? Tell your friends, hey, I have this great fun podcast with these 2 kooky guys who talk about movies and TV. We run the gamut. We have everything.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
We're all over the place is a better way to put it.
But in a good way. So do it right now before you forget. Well, if you think about I can picture 1, 2, 3, 4 sets for the most part. There was the main hallway.
Right.
There was the kitchen. There was the bedroom where Joan was all the time. And then there was Victor Buono and his mother's apartment.
Right.
And other than that, I know that they filmed Betty driving around the city. They didn't even use the screen in the back. She literally was driving around. I heard that her cameraman was sitting on the hood or something like that.
Yeah, they strapped a camera to the hood and she drove around Hollywood. Yeah, and it wasn't they were at Producer Studio, which was kind of a ramshackle studio that Warner Brothers used for its Westerns. Oh, I should say that once Seven Arts came up with the financing, Warner Brothers agreed to distribute the film. So they were back at Warner Brothers, their alma mater. But they were filming over on Producer's Studio, while Rosalind Russell, their contemporary, was filming the multi-million-dollar Gypsy at the big studio. So I don't think that didn't irk Betty more than a little bit. So anyway, yes. So they shot in 34 days, all around Hollywood too. The house still standing today is in the area, Largemont area in Hollywood.
I knew that's where that was. I thought I know that area. I couldn't remember the name.
You can go there today. They sold it recently, and you could have toured
all
it.
the homes in that area look the same.
Yes.
They're beautiful.
She goes, the newspaper she goes to is in Hollywood. It's all shot in that area in 34 days. Incredible. But they did it. And they only went 2 days over schedule. So no, these women weren't fighting. These women weren't, Joan wasn't strapping weights to her body to make Betty's back go out. And, they weren't doing these tricks to each other to screw, because they knew they had to get down to business, and they were very professional in that respect. And that's how they were able to film it. They did, of course, go to Malibu to film the final scene on the beach. That was their big location shoot for this film, was in Malibu.
I saw something that said with Santa Monica. I'm like, no, Santa Monica has big beaches. That has to be Malibu, because
it was
the beach
Malibu.
was very
Malibu.
small.
They shot some in the studio too.
Yeah,
they shot some in the studio.
Yeah, you could tell the studio shots.
Yeah,
when it focused on the two of them.
But I mean, it's incredible to think that nobody saw the potential for this film in Hollywood except for Joan Crawford and Robert Aldrich and Bette Davis to a certain extent, and it became such a huge hit that it did create a whole new genre of film. We just said it. Hagsploitation is the ungenerous word for it. Grand Dame Guignol is another word for it. It was basically these old movie stars doing horror films. They practically all of them did it, up except for one notable exception. Can you imagine who that one notable exception was, Brad, from that era that didn't do this?
I don't know.
You might. You know who she is. A little actress called Katharine Hepburn. There was no way Katharine Hepburn was going to do a horror film.
No.
She didn't need to. She was doing Eugene O'Neill, Long Day's Journey into Night. She didn't need to go and do Straight Jacket like Joan did, Lady in the Cage, The Night Walker like Barbara Stanwyck did. So they all ended up doing it as a cycle that actually ran out by the 70s. And really, none of them, to a T. Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte's pretty good. But none of them were as good as Baby Jane.
It's a lot of fun. It is campy.
Yeah. Well, it's a black comedy. People also don't realize that too. It was intentionally funny. Things were intentionally funny in this. We think it's just camp, but it's a camp. It is camp. It has become camp mostly because of Bette Davis's performance and because every drag queen in the world has done her at one point or another. But it was intended as a black comedy. There are touches of humor in it that people, I think, don't realize. They think it's just this campy, trashy film, and it's not. It's there are some moments of real fun, real humor.
Yeah, this is, as far as humor and horror go, it's not like, I can't think of the name of the zombie movie, the guy that played Scotty in Star Trek. It was really popular. It was zombies, and there was a lot of humor in it. And it was kind of gruesome here and there.
Well, I don't know horror, but Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead.
No. This was more recent. No. It's a kind of a farce on the zombie movies, or a spoof on the zombie movies.
Okay.
Yet it still has some good zombie stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like that. This is a difficult movie. It's very hard to watch. You'll cringe. It's painful. But like you said, there is humor at the same time.
Yeah.
That takes great skill, in my opinion.
Incredible skill. And these were incredibly skilled technicians to a T. There's a reason why this film has lasted 62 years and will continue to last on and on and on. These people were so adept at what they did. The stories about it, the making of it, again, you can watch a miniseries about it if you're really concerned. But some of the stuff that they did get right, Betty was very, very... Here's the thing about Baby Jane, and here's the thing about the character of Baby Jane that's so important, is that Bette Davis she's so iconic now, it's hard to believe. Bette Davis invented this, okay? She wasn't watching Jinx Monsoon or one of these people on Drag Race. This came out of Bette Davis's mind, this character. This came out of the costume she wore. Bette Davis said she created Baby Jane's walk as a character trait. Bette Davis had a very kinetic, very fast walk. Watch All About Eve. Watch any Bette Davis movie. She walks completely differently in Baby Jane. She's slow. She drags her feet. It all goes with the slovenliness, the laziness, the alcoholism of Baby Jane. The wigs, the makeup. Bette Davis said she viewed Jane as a woman who never washed her face. She just put on layer after layer after layer of makeup. This is some real thought going into this character. And we laugh at it today because we think it's so campy. But when you think about it, these were all decisions Bette Davis made. Very distinct decisions. Same thing with Joan Crawford. Less so. We think of Bette Davis as very campy in this because of these choices, but she invented them. She invented these choices, and they were so over the top, as Baby Jane is, that they became camp.
And her makeup was great. In fact, her daughter, when she first saw her, said, "Mom, you've gone too far."
Yeah, she did. I know. But for all the campiness, for all the scenery chewing, for all the over the top, there are moments of real quiet in Bette Davis's performance. I think one of my favorite scenes is after she dumps Elvira's body in the back of. Oh, by the spoiler alerts. Do we do spoiler alerts anymore? I don't even remember anymore.
I gave up.
Yeah, I think so. Whatever. So yes, there's a murder. It's the house. It's the maid. And Bette Davis dumps her body in the back of her car, and that's when she's caught by her neighbor, that nosy Mrs. Bates, played by Anna Lee. And Bette Davis's face when she's caught, and that whole scene, Bette Davis is very quiet and very. It's almost like she's had a night where she's cried and cried and cried, and then she's now calmed down and she's talking because she has that sense in her voice. She's drained because she just realizes she's committed murder. Baby Jane didn't start out as a murderess. You know, she wasn't Norman Bates. This developed, and she's horrified by what she just did. So she's still a little bit in reality at this point. Bette Davis is so quiet and so nuanced in that scene. You have to watch it because she has such a reputation of being over the top in this movie. There are moments, there are such details in her performance, the way she looks at people, the way she focuses on one particular part of a person or gives them the up and down. You can see it all. And so it's a shame that because this performance has become such camp that we miss those incredible nuances that Bette Davis created in this character.
Yeah, it's very clear when it starts out that she is just a horrible sister. And then you very quickly see in how she transitions to a cruel woman.
Yeah.
Then it transitions to a point after the murder that she is a horrible, paranoid woman who then starts to become so fearful she wants her sister's help after all that she's done to her. It's very clear. You know, I love dark movies and I love comedies. I think they're two of the hardest to write and make. So when you have a black comedy like this, if they knock it out of the park like this one, I love it.
Well, yeah, and she really points a portrait of a woman losing her mind.
Yes.
We are watching this woman lose her mind. Her grasp on reality is becoming lighter and lighter and lighter until the very end. She is literally, in her mind, she is literally a little girl again, which is just what gives that scene, the last scene at the beach, such pathos, because she's a little girl again. And we'll talk about that. But I also want to talk about Joan, because it's important to point Joan's performance.
Yes.
You know, Joan, there was no way Joan was going to play Baby Jane. There's just no way. Maybe she could have done it, but it would never have been as effective. And she knew she'd never get Bette in the movie. And she really wanted to make this movie with Bette because she knew it would be a box office blockbuster somewhere in the back of her mind. Joan's performance is the eye of the storm. If you look at Bette as the storm, Joan's performance is the eye of the storm. And Betty's performance would never be as effective as it is if you didn't have that calming center, which is Joan. And Joan wasn't being altruistic, or she wasn't being a martyr here, because think about it. She's playing a former glamour girl. Hello, Joan Crawford. She was a former glamour girl. Makes sense. And she was in a wheelchair, so she knew she'd get the audience sympathy. And you know, what happened very frequently, and still happens today, to actors who play a character who has some kind of a handicap or some kind of a challenge, mental or physical, they win Oscars. So don't think Joan wasn't thinking that. She's like, I'm in a wheelchair. I might just grab that second Oscar. Of course, Bette was thinking the same thing. Neither one of them got it. So Joan is just as important to this story and the success, and Joan's performance is just as important to Betty's performance as Betty's performance was itself. And I think it's important to point that out because Joan always gets short shrift. Is that a word? She always gets passed over when you talk about this movie because Bette Davis is so galvanizing in her performance.
Yeah, I don't know if Betty had more screen time or if it just seems that way because so many of Joan's scenes were by herself. They were solo scenes. But
yes,
yeah, Betty did a tremendous job. Joan, what really impressed me about her is there was so much in just her facial expressions.
Yes. Well, you know, the woman started in silent movies, so she knew how to use her face.
It showed. I mean, it really showed. There was so much pain and so much angst and fear in her face. She had every emotion there was.
Yes.
In there. Even moments of sympathy.
The sweating, you know. She's also, I'm not going to go on a sudden fear tangent, but sudden fear is another one of Joan Crawford's incredible performances. And in that one, she's in a similar situation in when she's finding out someone's trying to kill her husband, actually. And that's that same, nobody could sweat like Joan Crawford. Glamorously, but still, she would still sweat. And, you know, speaking of glamour, Joan did have a real problem letting go of a lot of the trappings of her glamour. Now, this film was shot by Ernest Haller, legendary cinematographer Ernest Haller, who had worked with Betty and Joan, both of them, back at Warner Brothers. In fact, they used to not really argue over him, but they used to grapple to see who they could get Ernie for their films. Betty usually won because, you know, Betty was the fifth Warner brother. So she ran that place. But anyway, he lights them so harshly. He films them so harshly. He said they would have killed me if I'd filmed them like this 20 years ago at Warner Brothers. But it was 20 years ago. You know, he drives that point home. So Joan's upset because not only does she have to look like this with this harsh lighting, she wanted to hold on to some of the vestiges of her glamour. She wanted to wear a shorter skirt, and the costume designer said, no, you can't. She's been in a wheelchair for decades. Her legs she's not going to be showing off your legs, Joan. One thing she would not let go of were her falsies. This is true. She would not let go of her falsies. And there's all kinds of stories about her lying on the beach and Betty saying, you know, when she would have to fall and her saying, I feel like I landed on two footballs. One person quoted Betty as saying, that dame has a different falsie for the day of the week. You never know what size falsie that broad's going to wear. She goes, I keep running into them like the goddamn Hollywood Hills. Whether those stories are true or not, doesn't matter. The point is that Joan wouldn't let go of the falsies, and she had to hold on to that one bit of glamour because she was Joan Crawford. So give her a break, for Christ's sake.
Now, you brought up the cinematography, so let me use this as a point to give the rundown on the film, the stats.
Yeah, I love that. Okay.
First, I want to talk about the movies that came out this year, and I'm going to go through probably a larger list than normal because it was quite an impressive year. I will say I saw a lot of bad films, but I think that's every year.
Many historians feel that 1962 was Hollywood's greatest year. In fact, there's a fantastic book about that, as opposed to 39 because of the number of tremendous films that came out in 62. But go ahead.
So The Longest Day was the highest grossing film of 1962. Lawrence of Arabia won Best Picture. And then I'm picking movies that some aren't necessarily the best, but the ones that seem to have lasted the longest as far as in people's minds. You have The Miracle Worker. You have The Manchurian Candidate, and I think it is far superior to the new one.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't even really watch all of the new one.
Oh, yeah.
And if you want to see Angela Lansbury in a role that will blow your mind, we'll have to do Manchurian Candidate.
I would love to. That film.
Yeah, we'll have to do. I love that film.
Incredible.
We got To Kill a Mockingbird, Mutiny on the Bounty, The Music Man. I have mixed feelings about that. And then we have Gypsy.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as you said it made $9 million.
Yes.
And the budget was mixed, but I think you said 800,000. I'll go with that number
between $800,000 and $900,000. It was under $1 million. Is the best way to put it.
Now, people seem to like this film. I've never seen this on Rotten Tomatoes before, or very rare. Mm-hmm. 91% of the critics love this film.
Wow.
And the exact same number, 91% of the audience love this film.
Yeah. You can't overstate what an impact this film made at the box office. What it did to these women's careers, momentarily, that is, putting them back on top. Bette Davis ran a very famous ad in the paper not long after she finished wrapping this film, and the title of it was Situation Wanted. And it was basically, she was putting a want ad for her services as an actress. She considered it tongue-in-cheek. She thought it was funny. She thought it was just some fun publicity to do because she was kind of pissed off that she's not getting good movie roles. That happened before this movie was released. She never would have done it after this movie was released because this movie was a huge hit. And she milked it for everything it was worth. As I said, she was on the Andy Williams show singing the theme song, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. I mean, and she rode this as long as she could, as far as she could, for the rest of her life, basically. We'll talk about the Oscar love/hate this film got, Brad, because that's another. The Oscars of 1963, I mean, there are 4 films in 62, but they were given in 63, are a big part of this whole Baby Jane legend. So let's talk a little bit about these Oscar nominations.
Yeah, this film won it won 5 awards.
No, it was nominated. It was nominated for 5.
You were right. Yes. Excuse that. So as far as the Academy Awards go, Bette Davis was nominated, but Anne Bancroft, as we said earlier, got the Miracle Worker. Victor Buono, Best Supporting Actor, he was beat out by Ed Begley Jr.'s father. Sweet Bird of Youth, which I am not familiar with that film at all.
Oh, it's wonderful. Geraldine Page, fantastic.
It won Best Black and White Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Black and White, and Best Sound. Those are all nominations.
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry. Those are all nominations. So it's nominated for those.
Baby Jane won 1 Oscar for Best Costume Design, Black and White. Because at that time, there was nominations. You could get a nomination for a black and white film and for a color film. But yes, as Brad said, it was nominated for 5 Oscars. It won 1. I think we should say Victor Buono, this was his first film. The part of Edwin, who is, what do you want to call it? Baby, he's a mama's boy. He's a big, dopey mama's boy who Baby Jane hires to help her launch her comeback. I wonder if you know who I am. I'm Baby Jane Hudson, because she was a big vaudeville star. So he's this mama's boy who basically finds out, he's kind of the architect of the end of the film. He finds out what Jane is doing to her sister. He leaves, which sends Bette Davis into a panic. He'll tell, he's going to tell. So she grabs Blanche, who's near death, throws her in the back of that car, drives out to the Malibu beach, where they're at night, the car's parked way over to the side, and then it becomes the next day, and the beach is crowded with people, and these 2 crazy loony women on a blanket in the middle of all this, in the middle of the summertime. And that's where the film ends. And we find out the ultimate secret of whatever happened to Baby Jane. But before you tell that, Brad, I do want to say that the funny thing I found out about the character of Edwin Flagg was originally going to be played by Peter Lawford.
Oh, no.
But Peter Lawford turned it down after he thought about it because he thought it would reflect badly on his current brother-in-law. And who was his current brother-in-law in 1962, Brad?
I think he might have been a president.
Exactly. He's like, I don't think John would appreciate this. So blame it on JFK. He didn't play Edwin Flagg. Victor Buono did, got an Oscar nomination for this incredible role, and then had an incredible career in Batman, right? Who did he play in Batman?
King Tut.
King Tut, that's right.
Not one of my favorite characters on Batman, but it was still a fun character. He pretty much stuck with maybe B, maybe C, as a rule, horror and terror films.
Right. No, exactly.
This is probably one of his best. He may have had some others, but most of them I just like, that was kind of a cheesy movie. Not a very good, scary movie.
Like they all did after Baby
But he had a
Jane.
good career doing that. I mean, he was busy.
He was a busy actor.
He stayed busy.
So tell the listeners who have not seen this film and don't care about spoiler alerts, what happens on Malibu Beach between a dying Blanche and a whacked out crazy Baby Jane, who now thinks she's a child again?
So the maid's body is found that Betty dumped, I don't know where it was, somewhere in the valley. So the cops are looking for her. And of course, they're not at home. And Betty and Joan are on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
She took her sister down to the beach. Now, Blanche is knocked out. So it was quite a drag to get her from the car down the beach, but she did it. It was in the middle of the night, so she had plenty of time to do that.
And she's dying, by the way. She's been starved to death by her sister, yes.
Her sister has been starved. She's been drugged. She's been chained up. She had tape on her face. She has not had a good time lately.
No.
So she is lying on the beach, still very drugged up and very weak. And she looked bad. They had her teeth all dried up. Or
she did, yeah.
Her lips all dried up. It looked pretty good.
She let her vanity go for that final scene.
So she could barely talk. And she admits to her sister. Now, the story up to this point was that Baby Jane was the one that caused the car accident. That
crippled Blanche.
Blanche got out of the car to open up the gate to the house. And while she was doing that, Baby Jane hit the gas and ran into her. And that's why Blanche wound up in a wheelchair. So now the twist at the end of the movie is Baby Jane was drunk that night and doesn't remember anything. And Blanche admits to her that she was angry because she had been humiliated by her sister. And she's the one that rammed the car into the gate to kill her sister. And in the process, she snapped her spine.
Right.
So all those years that Betty thought she had crippled her sister, it did not happen.
So the ultimate villain in this piece is Blanche. Because she has let her sister believe for 30 years or more that she is the reason she's in the wheelchair. But you are, Blanche, you are in that chair. And she plays that guilt card on her sister. This is what has created Baby Jane's dementia, her downfall, her alcoholism. She believes she's responsible for this accident that crippled her sister. But it's not true. A dying Blanche confesses, "You weren't driving that night. You were too drunk. I was." And the look on Bette Davis's face, oh my God, I get chills thinking about it. And she says the famous line, "You mean all this time we could have been friends?"
Yes.
And she's now totally a child in her mind. Completely. This is what makes this horror film. She's now totally in her mind a child. And it's funny because they talk about this in Feud too, and I see it when I watch Baby Jane. All the, for lack of a better term, horror flows from her face, washes away from her face, and she almost glows, Baby Jane, because the guilt is gone. She's been released by her dying sister.
That's the funny thing. It wasn't, rather than anger, she turned to relief.
Relief.
And then crazy.
Then back, well, she's lost it. It's over. It's done. Blanche is dead. Those were Blanche's last dying words. Blanche is dead. The police rush. They finally see these old women on a blanket in the middle of Malibu Beach. Oh, maybe that's who we're looking for. They rush to them, but Jane is off entertaining the masses because a crowd has gathered around her, and she's in total Baby Jane mode. She's a girl again on the vaudeville stage, doing her dance for her public. And as she twirls and twirls, the camera pulls back. We see the police finding Blanche, and that's where the movie ends. So that twist is kind of like the my sister, my daughter twist from Chinatown, I think. Because you realize, wow, Blanche is the real villain here. She's been making her sister believe this whole time that she crippled her, and she didn't. And that's when she said, "You bet I won't forget." At the very beginning, it all comes together. So it's a brilliant screenplay, a brilliant twist. One of the reasons I love this movie.
I'm going to correct the film historian on one thing.
Okay.
In the book, Farrell makes it clear we don't know what happens to Blanche. Did she die on the beach or did she not? She's just lying there.
Well.
And they did the same thing in the movie.
Come on.
She was inches from death, but you notice they never showed her die. I want her to live and deal with what she needs to live with.
Everybody wants to believe that Blanche lives, but I mean, come on.
She was pretty close, but maybe somebody gave her a sip of water and she
was
rejuvenated.
Pretty damn close.
She was close, yes.
So what happened? So I just want to quickly sum up what happened in the Oscars of '63. And if you want to know more, go online, watch Feud if you want to. The story is basically Bette Davis was nominated for Best Actress. Joan Crawford was not. Joan Crawford was a little upset about this. But unlike some of the stories and what Feud does, Joan did not campaign against Betty. She could not have campaigned against and tell people not to vote for Betty with Hedda Hopper. That's total bullshit. That's total Ryan Murphy fantasy. What she did do was contact the New York nominees and say, if you cannot attend the Oscar ceremony, I will accept for you. Now, that was a pretty good odds. Think about these odds for a minute, because the nominees were Geraldine Page. She was doing a play in New York. She wasn't going to go. She was relieved. Anne Bancroft, same thing. She was doing Mother Courage in New York. She wasn't going to go. Hepburn was nominated for A Long Day's Journey. Hepburn never went to an Oscar ceremony that she was nominated for, so she wasn't going to show up. So the only wild card was Lee Remick, and Lee Remick was such a dark horse, nobody cared. So odds are that one of these actresses was going to win, and Joan was going to accept for them, and that's exactly what happened. The nominees were named. The winner was announced, Anne Bancroft, and Bette Davis basically saw her co-star, her unnominated co-star, from Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, upstage her, literally, sweep by her on stage to accept the Oscar. So Joan was in all the photos the next day. Joan is holding an Oscar that Bette Davis lost. And that's really when the feud began. Not really before. They really didn't give a shit about each other before. That's really when Betty got pissed off. And some of these incredible lines that have now become legendary that Betty said about Joan began that night. Do you know the famous one about when Joan Crawford died? Do you know that? Do you know that quote? When Joan Crawford died, they contacted Bette Davis, and Bette Davis said, "You should never say bad things about the dead. You should only say good. Joan is dead. Good." She also said, "There may be a heaven, but if Joan Crawford is there, I'm not going." So yes, she was pissed off. And she also carried on the story that Joan carried that Oscar clutched to her bosom for a year, which she didn't. She took it to Anne Bancroft like a month later. There's documentation. But it pissed Bette Davis off. So with reason, with good reason. You really can't blame Betty. That was the ultimate act of hubris on Joan Crawford's part. But she was upset. She wasn't nominated. And she kind of put this whole thing together so you can understand it. So that's really the beginning of the feud, not this long, drawn-out thing that we're led to believe these two women. These two women weren't friends, but they worked well together. And as Brad said when we opened the show, they were professionals. She showed up, and she knew her lines.
There is another rumor.
Yes.
That I want to bring up. Catherine Cermak, who was Bette Davis' assistant, she wrote a book called Miss D and Me.
Right.
Now, I got to tell you, there's some stuff in there that's very suspect. A lot of people are questioning this book. But I do want to bring up some things that she said. One thing, if you notice in that clip, Bette Davis said that she had to win because she's an Aquarius.
No, she's an Aries. She's an Aries.
An Aries, I'm sorry, yes.
As was Joan Crawford.
Oh, interesting. So,
yeah.
So when Catherine Cermak was interviewed by Betty to be her assistant, the very first question she asked, according to Catherine, was, "What is your sign?" And when Catherine said, "I'm a Libra," Betty was very pleased. Now, one of the rumors that she is saying is that the reason there was the battle between Joan and Betty is because Joan had a crush on Betty.
Yeah, there's that. Yes. I've heard that.
And she said, but that wasn't going to happen because Miss Davis is a man's woman.
Well, there are questions.
I don't know about that one.
There are questions about Joan's sexuality. She was what you would call fluid, which, good for you, Joan. She had a very healthy sexual appetite. I don't think that is disputed. And there were people have said, like in the 40s when they were both at Warner Brothers, that Joan would send Betty flowers. She would send her gifts. And was that a crush, or was that just Joan Crawford being Joan Crawford? I mean, Bette Davis also said, that bitch will write a thank you note for a thank you note. So that's just who Joan Crawford was. And Carol Burnett also, she didn't say that, but Carol Burnett told a very funny story about Joan contacting her after she did her takeoff of Mildred Pierce on the Carol Burnett show, writing her a lovely letter. And then Carol wrote Joan a thank you letter And then Joan wrote a letter back to Carol as a thank you for the thank you. And so then Carol felt she had to respond. So it went back and forth. So yes, that's just who Joan Crawford was. Fundamentally, they were very different women inside. But in very important ways, they were so much alike. And it is kind of a shame that all that time, they could have been friends.
That is a shame. That is a shame.
It is a shame.
I want to bring up two things. I normally don't get into goofs, but one jumped out of me. And when I saw it listed in IMDb, I was so excited. I'm like, oh, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one that caught that.
Okay.
Jane puts an ad in the newspaper saying that she is looking for an accompanist for an actress that wants to return or something of that nature.
Right.
And the advertisement gave her name and a phone number.
Mm-hmm.
So when Victor Bueno, very awkward character, calls about the job, she says, be here, I don't know, at 4 p.m. He says, okay. She hung up the phone, never mentioned the address, and he shows up at her house. And I don't usually notice it, but I thought, God, that's blaring. That's blaring. The other one is more of a funny one.
Uh-huh.
Barbara Merrill, who you know is Bette Davis's daughter.
BD.
She played the next...
BD.
BD, yes. She played the next door neighbor's daughter.
Right.
She only had a couple of scenes.
Thank God.
I swear to God, when she was talking, I thought for sure, because I didn't know who she was, I thought for sure, oh, this is Joanna Barnes, who played the haughty girlfriend on Auntie Mame. Her voice was just like that. Oh, darling.
Except she was a put-on, and Auntie Mame was a put-on. That's the way B.D. Hyman talked.
That is sad. It was annoying as hell.
Here's what's sad. You're Bette Davis, okay? You are disputably the greatest screen actress in the world. You've got more Oscar nominations than anybody. This was her 10th. This is your daughter, okay? She is so bad. Can you imagine how Bette Davis felt? Saying, maybe you should get married at 16, BD, because you sure as hell ain't an actress. So, ironically, Christina Crawford was also an actress. Something else they had in common. These women had so much in common. If they would have gotten past their egos, they really could have been friends. They really could have been friends.
Reminds me of a friend of mine, Eric Douglas, who most people have probably never heard of Eric. He was Michael Douglas's brother, Kirk Douglas's son. And let's just say he didn't make it. He died very sadly. But let's just say I'm glad for Kirk that Michael did very well.
Well, I think, I don't want to say it, but I think we've just kind of discussed whatever happened to Baby Jane in an hour. How about that? Now that is an achievement. We didn't get an Oscar nomination, but we did it in under an hour. I'm very proud of us.
We could have gone on and kept going, but I think we said it all.
I think we said it all. Except one thing we haven't said. But you know what? I don't want to say it, Brad. So let's not say goodbye. Let's just say au revoir.
No, let's say goodbye.
I'm sorry.